Bai Kang and Xiao Feng entered the girls' dormitory again, and shortly after, they began to hear a loud noise coming from outside. She turned her head to the side and with a serious look, she told him that this sound was coming from the same direction Su Chen had gone. Upon hearing this, Xiao Feng's expression changed drastically. With a worried look, he started wondering what was happening. Bai Kang knew that something bad was happening, so she decided to take a look first. She turned her head slightly towards Xiao Feng, started looking into his eyes, and asked him to stay here watching over and protecting the others. Xiao Feng wasn't willing to let her go alone since the outside was full of dangers. With a serious look, he refused and told her that he also wanted to go with her. At the same time outside, all the zombies got out of the truck and started moving towards Su Chen. Steel Teeth couldn't help but burst into laughter, while Su Chen simply put his hands in his pants pockets and remained silent. While Steel Teeth had his foot resting on the crane, he placed his elbow on his knee, put his other hand on his waist, stared at Su Chen intently and asked if Fang King was his classmate. He decided to give him a chance to be the hero and rescue her. With a smile, he told Su Chen that if he wanted to save his classmate, then he had to kneel before him and beg. Upon hearing this, Fang King was somewhat surprised and thought there was still hope of surviving this situation. While Su Chen had one hand in his pants pocket, he placed the other under his chin, started looking at the ground and thought that saving her was not impossible. Upon hearing this, Fang King turned her head towards him and couldn't help but feel happy and relieved. She asked him to kneel before Steel Teeth as soon as possible and save her. With a calm look, Su Chen began to stare into Fang King's eyes and explained that there was a problem. Upon hearing this, she became somewhat confused and disappointed at the same time. She asked what the problem was and also if he wasn't going to save her. She reminded him that he had just clearly said that he would save her. Su Chen simply remained silent and in a matter of seconds, she lost her composure, started staring at Su Chen and couldn't help but explode in anger since he was the one who had said he would save her. She asked him how he could change his mind so quickly and also if he still considered himself a man, adding that it was the duty of gentlemen to save ladies. With a murderous look, Su Chen responded to her that he indeed was a man but didn't deserve to save her. After saying this, he mocked her by asking if she wanted him to help her contact the gentlemen living abroad and see if they were willing to save someone like her. Fang King became even more furious and soon realized that Su Chen was getting back at her for telling him he was wrong in front of everyone in the girls' dormitory. She started staring at Su Chen and began shouting, asking him why he was seeking revenge on her for such a small thing. In the blink of an eye, she completely lost her composure, screaming like a bitch and asking him if he thought she would apologize to him and beg humbly for his help. She vented by telling him that reality proved he was a complete loser, adding that she didn't need the help of a loser like him. Su Chen couldn't help but feel happy. He began to look at her, pointing his finger at her and with a smile asked her to remember her own words later. Little by little, the zombies started approaching Fang King, who had her arms and body tied to the crane. Upon feeling the presence of the zombies, she slightly turned her head back. At that moment, her expression changed drastically. With a look full of fear, she began to wonder what was happening. The zombies approached her and slowly began to devour her, starting with her legs. Due to the pain, she opened her mouth and started screaming in agony. She couldn't help but ask for help and regret mocking Su Chen. Steel Teeth stared at Su Chen intently, pointing his finger at him. Seeing that he was a person who didn't help others in times of danger, Steel Teeth thought he was a very interesting person. He decided to stop thinking about it since soon Su Chen would end up like her anyway. He decided it was time to show him the technology of their evolution base. With a crazy look, he took out a jar of powder from his pocket, removed the cap, and began to paint his face with the powder, explaining to Su Chen that if one applied this powder on their body, then the monsters would obey and treat them as one of their own. Su Chen wasn't even slightly surprised. With a calm look, he asked Steel Teeth if applying ashes on the body could really make the monsters believe that one belonged to the same species as them. Upon hearing that the powder was actually ashes, Steel Teeth brought the jar closer to his face, started staring at the powder and couldn't help but sweat and panic. Quickly, he put away the jar, turned his back on Su Chen, and began to move away from him thinking that this was disgusting. He gave the order to all the monsters to attack Su Chen until they tore him apart and made him into pieces. Upon hearing his command, all the monsters gained momentum and began advancing quickly towards Su Chen. He simply put his hands in his pants pockets, turned his head towards them, and stood still without making a single movement. Once the monsters got close enough, Su Chen took his hands out of his pants pockets, extending them to the sides. With a murderous look, he decided it was time to finish them off. At that moment, 2 swords that he had stored in the system's inventory appeared in his hands. Gaining momentum, he began to advance rapidly towards the monsters, and using his swords, he cut their bodies into pieces. After finishing off several monsters, Su Chen landed on the ground. He supported himself with one knee and one hand on it, dropping a sword in the process which got stuck in the ground. He extended his other hand towards the sky and with a killer look, started staring fixedly at the ground, causing the swords to return to the system's inventory. Steel Teeth wiped the dust off his face, and while he was still cleaning his mouth with his hand, he began to turn his head back and asked Su Chen how dare he play with him before dying. Su Chen approached the truck, put his hands in his pants pockets, and started staring at Steel Teeth. Once he turned his body back and saw Su Chen, he couldn't help but be shocked and wonder how he had gotten here. At the same time, Xiao Feng and Bai Kang left the girls' dormitories and began to follow the trail of the monster's sound. Several seconds later, they turned a corner and upon seeing what was in front of them, they couldn't help but be shocked. Seeing so many monsters, Bai Kang became alert, dropped her arms to the sides, and couldn't help but worry about Su Chen. Xiao Feng was terrified. He began to look at the monsters with a fearful gaze and couldn't help but sweat and feel afraid. He didn't know where so many monsters had come from. In the blink of an eye, the monsters completely devoured Fang Qing's lower body, leaving only her head. The monsters surrounded Su Chen, who was standing in front of the truck. Steel Teeth, who was on top of the roof, extended his hand to the sides and remained silent. When looking more closely, Steel Teeth saw that all the monsters were standing still. Upon seeing this, he couldn't help but get angry and ordered them all to attack Su Chen. While Su Chen was wiping his shirt with his hand, he started looking at Steel Teeth and calmly asked him to stop shouting since the monsters wouldn't obey him anymore. Upon hearing this, he was shocked and started looking at Su Chen with a confused look, asking him what he was talking about. The reality was that Su Chen had already finished off all the monsters when he had been fighting against them. He put his hands in his pants pockets, turned his head to the side, and asked Steel Teeth why he was wasting his energy in vain. Upon seeing that all the monsters had been defeated, he couldn't help but be shocked. With a surprised look on his face, he began to wonder what was happening and how this could be possible. At that moment, Su Chen opened a system portal. This portal was connected to another portal that appeared behind Steel Teeth. Su Chen entered the portal and appeared behind him. He stared at him intently and explained that originally he didn't want to mess with the people from the evolution base. Upon hearing Su Chen's voice, his expression changed drastically. With a confused look, he began to wonder what was happening. Su Chen grabbed Steel Teeth by the metal mask with both hands and asked him who had sent him to kill him. Due to fear of what his superiors could do to him, he decided not to reveal anything to Su Chen. Upon seeing this, he decided that he couldn't let him live. Su Chen tightly grabbed Steel Teeth's head with both hands. He couldn't help but sweat and panic. He started looking at Su Chen, asking him what he was trying to do. Su Chen stared into his eyes and couldn't help but smile. Seeing this, it didn't take long for him to realize what Su Chen was about to do. He tried asking him to stop, but his efforts were in vain. At that moment, Su Chen tightly grabbed his head and began to exert force, causing intense pain to Steel Teeth, who couldn't help but scream in agony. Due to the strength with which Su Chen was pulling Steel Teeth's head, gradually his head started separating from his body. In the blink of an eye, Su Chen ripped off his head along with his spine. Upon seeing this scene, Bai Kang couldn't help but be terrified and speechless. She was unable to believe that Su Chen had finished off all the monsters in an instant. She remembered that this had happened before and thought that it couldn't be achieved just by exercising. Thinking this, she couldn't help but wonder what kind of monster Su Chen was. While holding Steel Teeth's head in one hand, he put the other hand in his pants pocket, turned his head towards Bai Kang and told her to pay more attention to the people in the girls' dormitory. He also added that it would be great for him to have a competent assistant. At the same time in the Green City Hotel, sun rays began to enter Su Chen's room where Duan was sleeping. She started blushing as she was having an erotic dream. Several seconds later, she opened her eyes and called out to Su Chen with her mouth wide open. Still half asleep, she sat up and asked him not to leave her alone. She sat down, placed both hands behind her on the bed, opened her legs, started looking towards the bed and couldn't help but blush even more. She had dreamt of Su Chen again. She didn't know why he hadn't returned yet. She turned her head to one side and began searching for Su Chen. At that moment, she remembered his words. A few days ago when she was with him, with a serious look on his face, he asked her if she wasn't useful, then what right did she have to stay by his side? With a determined look, she decided to do something about it and not be a burden to Su Chen. She picked up the gun he had left on the table. She wanted to be his right hand and left arm. At that moment, she began to hear a sound. She filled herself with courage, left his apartment, and started searching the other hotel rooms. She grabbed the gun and forcefully opened the door. This apartment was actually an office. Upon closer inspection, she saw that there was no one inside. But this was very strange since the sound clearly came from here. At that moment, she heard the same sound coming from the area behind her. With a frightened expression, she slowly began to turn her head backwards. Upon seeing what had appeared, her expression changed drastically. With a surprised and confused look, she started wondering when this had happened. Behind her was a monster which suddenly appeared in front of her. She went into shock and couldn't help but sweat as she wondered what kind of monster it was. This is the end of the video. If you guys want to see the next part, then don't forget to subscribe and like the video.